You can learn a lot about modern cars by watching where people look when they back up now. For practically ever, backing up mostly meant mirrors, turning your head, estimating distance, and building a mental picture of where the car existed in space. You had to learn the shape of your vehicle, where the corners were, and how far objects really were from your bumper based on instinct, a little repetition, and some visual judgment. Now, in many modern cars, drivers increasingly look somewhere else entirely. They end up looking at screens. Backup cameras and surround view systems, coupled with parking sensors, digital rearview mirrors, and trajectory lines, give drivers a dramatically better view of the world. And what's interesting isn't just that the technology changed, it's that human perception adapted to the technology almost as quickly as engineers and manufacturers could introduce it. One thing that has largely remained true in all this is that humans always adapt to the systems surrounding them. That's true with phones, GPS, and even streaming media. And it's interestingly true with cars today. Modern vehicles don't just change how we physically drive, they also change where attention goes, how drivers process information, and eventually what feels normal behind the wheel. And backing up might be one of the clearest examples of that happening in real time. If you really pay attention, modern cars aren't just helping drivers see behind them anymore. They're increasingly deciding how drivers see behind them. And if you think about it, that's a very different type of thing. Let's go back to when backup cameras first started becoming common. Then they mostly felt supplemental. If you were a driver before backup cameras, you still used mirrors and you turned your head. The camera was just simply a different reference point. But over time, the screen slowly became primary, and you can see it everywhere now. People back out of parking spaces while looking almost entirely at the center display. The mirrors become so secondary that sometimes the rear glass barely matters at all. And honestly, that change makes complete sense. Modern cars are harder to see out of than older vehicles. Belt lines are higher and rear windows are smaller. Safety standards like rear head restraints changed vehicle design dramatically over the past couple of decades. So the camera became more useful and systems became better. It started with higher resolution, then wider angles and improved night visibility. But then came moving trajectory lines and cross-traffic alerts and ultimately 360-degree surround cameras. Eventually, many modern cars stopped merely showing drivers what was behind them and started interpreting space for the driver. And that's where this gets really interesting, because traditional mirrors preserve a fairly direct optical relationship with reality. Your brain estimates depth, angle, and distance from reflective light and natural perspective cues. Even though mirrors compress space somewhat, they still maintain a fairly intuitive spatial relationship. But camera systems work differently. Wide-angle lenses distort scale, and distance gets interpreted through overlays and graphics. Digital rearview mirrors flatten and normalize brightness differently than natural vision, and then parking sensors translate space into tones and colored bars. So the car is processing the visual environment even before the driver can really even see it. One of the interesting things about human vision is how quickly the brain recalibrates once it trusts a new visual system, and after a while, the camera image simply becomes reality. And once you can trust the camera, you change how you approach parking. A lot of drivers now reverse into parking spaces more confidently than they used to because the camera removes uncertainty. Many people rely less on mental estimating where the corners of the vehicle are because the car continuously displays those boundaries visually. Parking becomes less about building a spatial model internally and more about interpreting the interface correctly. The reality is that this isn't necessarily bad. In many ways, these systems are objectively pretty impressive. A modern surround view camera system can provide visibility that would have been impossible in older cars. Cross-traffic alerts can warn drivers about hazards they physically can't see yet. Parking sensors help prevent expensive mistakes, and digital mirrors can remain clear in rain or darkness where conventional mirrors would struggle. The point isn't that drivers are worse. The point is that human behavior naturally reorganizes itself around whatever systems become reliable. That's the important distinction. So let's think about digital rearview mirrors specifically. At first, they feel strange because your eyes know something is different immediately. The depth perception feels different and motion doesn't look exactly the same as it does in reflective glass. But then something fascinating happens over time. Within days, many people stop noticing those differences and adapt to what they are seeing, much like watching television. The brain simply recalibrates, and eventually, the traditional mirror can almost feel limited by comparison. Similarly, surround view systems change how people think spatially. A top-down parking camera is not a real viewpoint, it's a constructed one. The car combines multiple camera feeds, interprets perspective, stitches the images all together, and presents a synthetic representation of space that no human could physically observe naturally. Drivers adapt to it almost instantly, and after enough repetition, it feels intuitive. That's remarkable when you really think about it, because what's happening is perceptual retraining. Drivers slowly stop building the same kinds of mental spatial maps they once had to because the vehicle increasingly externalizes that work. Younger drivers who learned primarily with cameras often approach backing up differently than people who learn with mirrors alone. Their attention patterns are different, their comfort zones are different, and their spatial references are different. When you think about it, most newer vehicles are increasingly becoming perception management systems and not just transportation machines. They filter noise, vibration, and speed sensation, and now increasingly, they filter and interpret spatial information too. The fascinating thing is how quickly human behavior accepts those changes as normal. I think that's really the bigger story here. Modern cars didn't suddenly transform drivers overnight, but the process of driving gradually became more mediated, more interpreted, and more software assisted. And human perception adapted exactly the way human perception always adapts. Until one day, people stopped looking behind them the same way they used to and barely even noticed the transition happened. This is Wrench and Reason, where we explain how modern cars actually work. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.